feel like we're living in a parallel universe. We hear Labor members sprout that they have these roundtables and the housing crisis, they've got a plan to address it, and yet what we haven't seen is anyone in charge in this government. We've got multiple ministers who do have legislative and moral responsibility, but we don't see anyone who's actually in charge and driving the program. Let's have a little look just at the Land Supply and Development Monitoring Report, which is supposed to monitor the SEQ's region's land supply and development activity. And this was supposed to be just one indicator to help monitor and drive the timely release and provide appropriate information to the market. And I understand the latest monitoring report for December 2022 still hasn't been released. And this is indicative of this government. I'm sure they've got the information, but they're not sharing it with all of the market, and yet the market's also saying the way that government's interacting with it is broken. I believe in good planning. I believe in the right infrastructure to deliver the appropriate types of accommodation in our communities. But this government has completely dropped the ball. And their concept of build to rent, I believe, is recognition and it's an admission that they've totally blown the systemic reform that's required to help encourage more investment in the private rental market. I'm sure there'll be some nice projects that'll help some, but there'll be commercial incompetence. You won't know the deals that have been done. Why shouldn't there be open books about this? If we really want to see investment in the private sector, with the government encouraging people in, have systemic reform, because we do need private investment in this sector. Roughly, there's about 70% of homes owned by owner-occupiers, about 30% by renters. It varies a little bit in some markets. And what we've seen in recent times, there has been a tremendous number of people who've decided to go into the homeowner market and have bought their own homes for the first time. And many of the homes that have been on the market and being sold that were rentals haven't been coming back into the rental pool. There is a shortfall of supply. But I want to quote some figures just on the Sunshine Coast where I am, where we have seen a record number of people who are homeless, working poor, people who had never expected to be homeless, and this is being reflected throughout Queensland. Between 2016 and 2021, an average population increase was of about 8,500 per year, and this was before COVID, before the COVID disruption. And what did we see in regard to new home approvals? About 2,800 new home approvals per year. Currently, we're sitting with a vacancy rate in the rental market of about 0.8%. Long story short, there is a lack of supply, and this has been reflected everywhere. If we want to see more supply in the market, you're going to have to do a whole lot better than what we've seen today. It's just tinkering around the edges. And some of the programs are nice, but it's tinkering around the edges. And I'll still have people coming into my office who are sleeping in tents, who are sleeping in cars. And when I talk to some of the social agencies and people are out there trying to help these folks, they say, you know, it's changed from when here's a family living in a car, we'll get you into emergency accommodation, to how old's your family living in the car? They're old enough to be okay. If they're little kids, we'll get you into emergency accommodation. And I kid you not, that's one of the conversations that's been relayed to me by somebody who's at the front line of trying to help the most vulnerable. For goodness sake, we need more urgency and practical solutions than these roundtables, which are more about media spinners than about driving the wheels to release more supply. Not enough's being done, no minister's responsible, and still there are some incredibly stupid decisions being made by some of the ministers of this government, such as Minister de Brenni, what he's done with Public Works, what he's done with the National Construction Code, what he's done in ignoring the concerns of the building industry, who are saying we are facing genuine situations where more will go broke because he is not listening to them. Now, I believe that you can bring about appropriate reform to the National Construction Code, but you wouldn't do it the way this man's doing it, where they're talking about an average $50,000 increase in the average house build in some areas, where a whole raft of your display homes with your builders are no longer going to be of use. We are seeing some places a slab-on-ground house with some increases of about 20%, houses on sloping sites around 30%. But when I talk to people in far North Queensland, about some of the proposed changes coming in the way that this National Construction Code is to be implemented, They're saying it's a whole lot more than about $50,000 per home. And other builders are saying the uncertainty and the way it's been done with this chaotic government means that they're going to get out of the industry. We have to listen to these people, but I don't believe this government is listening, because we need the builders to be able to build the homes, to be able to house the people who are currently living in the bushes, getting tents, trying to head for wherever they can to get shelter, or living in their cars. You're still mucking around the margins of this. It's time to have a minister who's responsible. It's time to release the data rather than hiding it. And the land supply monitoring reports and all the other reports, this government will have wall-to-wall of the data, but they're not listening to industry. They're not listening to industry. And I have spoken to many people, not only in the building industry, but also those who want to see timely release of new housing stock into the market. This is about supply, but what we've seen in the last 8 years has been a falling pipeline of supply relative to population increase, and COVID on top of that has disrupted it, but the trend was already there. It's pretty ridiculous when it can take 8 to 10 years to get some housing master plan and released to the market, and a lack of recognition from government that they need to do more. But it's indicative when you also see a Transport Minister presiding over the department that when they go to expand the roads, oops, they've got housing developments that were never notified that they had houses under the potential alignment for expanded roads. That's the bread and butter stuff of what a good government would normally do, is ensure that the planning's done in such a way so they don't have to bulldoze brand new homes. In a time of when we're seeing there is a housing crisis, a government that can't plan, can't deliver and won't listen to the people who've got the solutions. And who pays the price ultimately? Some of the most vulnerable people we know. Some of the most vulnerable Queenslanders. And I've never seen so many coming through my door and Maroochydore. I know my colleagues in this House have seen the same, and across the parliament. People who are desperate. We need better from this government than round tables of hot air and talking. It's time for action. It's time to put a minister in charge with clear, transparent, deliverable KPIs. Deliver the housing. Incentivise the private sector market rather than just your mates with a few commercial and confidence deals. Reform the system because it's broken currently, and the announcements to date are actually only verifying that fact. I'm sure, as I said, there'll be some nice projects built, but it won't be enough unless we actually start to see a real reform of the system. I want to see people with the dignity of a roof over their heads, without the terrible situation where they don't have that pipeline of supply. They're either moving out of the area and increasingly moving into desperation and distress. I heard some members laughing or cackling a bit when my colleague, the members for Surfers Paradise, was talking about a gentleman who was looking to bring a shed into compliance as a dwelling space. And I thought how ignorant they are, that there are people who are living a whole lot worse than sheds. A whole lot worse than sheds. And I know that there are people literally living in the bushes, living in parks, living in cars, living under bridges, living on couches, living in vulnerable situations. And that should never be the case. It's time we saw action from the government that actually delivered, rather than what we've seen today is a crisis of their chaos, which is now hurting the most vulnerable. And it's time that they woke up to this and stopped blaming other people and took action.